Picture this. It's November 10th, 1444. You're 20 years old. You're a king. And you've just made the single worst decision of your life. Your generals are screaming at you to stop. They're begging you to hold the line. But you don't listen. Instead, you slam your heels into the sides of your white horse and lead 500 armored knights into a wild, glorious charge across the marshy battlefield. Your target isn't a banner. It isn't a fortress. It's the Sultan himself. You can see him in the distance, standing behind a wall of soldiers. And in your mind, the logic is simple. Cut off the head of the snake, and the body will die. But the moment you smash into the enemy formation, the trap snaps shut. Because you're not charging frightened peasants. You've just thrown yourself straight into the Janissaries, the elite, immovable wall of the Ottoman Empire. And within seconds, the battlefield erupts. Cannons thunder so loudly they drown out prayer. Your horse is struck, collapses beneath you. You're dragged from the saddle into freezing mud. And the last thing you see isn't the triumph of a crusade. It's the flash of a Janissary scimitar coming down to claim your head. That single impulsive charge didn't just kill a monarch. It ended the Battle of Varna in catastrophic defeat and left Europe wide open. But here's the question. How did a massive Christian army, blessed by the Pope and led by tactical geniuses, end up butchered in a Bulgarian swamp? Before we dive into this forgotten story of survival, betrayal, and tragedy, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of history, consider hitting like and subscribing, and comment where you're listening from. Because it still blows my mind that we're exploring these ancient stories together from all around the world, connected across time by pure curiosity. Now, to understand the blood on the battlefield, we have to start with the ink on the parchment. We need to rewind just a few months, back to a time when the world looked completely different. Because the year 1444 didn't begin with a war cry. It began with a sigh of relief. Europe was exhausted. For decades, Christendom had been locked in a losing struggle against the rising Ottoman Empire. And the Ottomans weren't just another enemy. They were a force of nature. A highly organized, gunpowder-driven machine swallowing the Balkans piece by piece. Hungary stood as the final shield protecting Central Europe. But that shield was cracking. Then, in the summer of 1444, something incredible happened. After brutal campaigns led by the brilliant Hungarian warlord János Hunyadi, the Ottoman Sultan Murad II agreed to negotiate. And that was rare. Sultans didn't beg for peace. But Murad wasn't like most rulers. He was a warrior who hated war. He was sick of constant campaigning, sick of palace intrigue, and grieving the death of his favorite son. What Murad wanted, what almost no powerful man in history ever truly wants, was retirement. So in the city of Szeged, a monumental treaty was drafted. And the terms? They were shockingly favorable to the Christians. The Ottomans agreed to halt their expansion, return lost territory, and maintain peace for 10 full years. It felt like a miracle. To seal the agreement, King Ladislaus III of Poland and Hungary placed his hand on the Bible and swore to God that he would keep the peace. Across from him, Ottoman envoys swore on the Quran. The border was secure, the war was over, and Murad II was so relieved. He actually followed through. He abdicated his throne. He handed the empire over to his 12-year-old son, Mehmed II, the boy who would one day become the Conqueror, but who at that moment was just an inexperienced child. Murad packed his things and retreated to Manisa in Anatolia, ready to drink wine, read philosophy, and live among gardens instead of corpses. He believed the oath of a Christian king. He believed it meant something. But Murad made one mistake. He forgot to account for one man. Enter Cardinal Julian Cesarini. Cesarini was the papal legate, the Pope's personal representative. He was intelligent, charismatic, and terrifyingly convinced he was right. When he looked at the peace of Szeged, he didn't see victory. He saw weakness. To Cesarini, making peace with the infidel wasn't mercy, it was sin. Because in his eyes, the Ottoman Empire had never been more vulnerable. The Sultan had retired. The throne was held by a child. The armies were resting. This was the moment to wipe them off the map forever and reclaim Jerusalem. So Cesarini went to work on the young king, and Ladislaus was exactly what you'd expect from a 20-year-old monarch. He was ambitious, emotional, hungry for legacy, burning with religious fervor, desperate to be remembered. And Cesarini whispered a concept into his ear that would go down as one of the most controversial theological arguments in military history. He told Ladislaus that an oath sworn to a non-Christian was null and void before God. That breaking your word wasn't dishonor. It was holy. This was the essence of the papal betrayal, a spiritual loophole designed to justify political ambition. Imagine the pressure. You're 20. The voice of the Pope tells you your honor demands you break your word. Your generals, men like János Hunyadi, are divided. Hunyadi respects the Ottomans, but even he is tempted. Because the logic seems sound. The old wolf is gone. A puppy sits on the throne, and we have surprise. So just days after swearing on the gospel, Ladislaus tore up the treaty. He declared the truce invalid. Messengers were sent, banners raised, orders given. They marched south, believing they were headed for easy victory. They believed they were God's chosen warriors. They had no idea their broken oath had triggered a chain reaction, one that would drag the old wolf roaring back from retirement. And as they crossed the Danube River, leaving safety behind, the countdown to Varna began. The die was cast. But the players hadn't realized yet. The game was rigged. While the kings and cardinals of Europe congratulated themselves for their clever, holy deception, a completely different scene was unfolding 300 miles away in the gardens of Manisa. This is where we find Sultan Murad II, and it's important to understand something right away. Murad, at this moment, was not the terrifying warlord from European propaganda. He wasn't seated on a throne of skulls. He was a man in a silk robe, a man who had traded armor for poetry. He spent his days debating philosophy, sipping wine, watching flowers bloom, and truly trying, to forget the weight of the crown he'd just given up. For Murad, the peace of Szeged wasn't a pause. It was the end. He had looked at his empire, looked at his enemies, and decided, I've done enough. He handed the empire to his son, Mehmed II. Now, we know Mehmed today as Mehmed the Conqueror, the genius who would smash Constantinople in 1453 and reshape the world. But in 1444, he wasn't a conqueror. He was 12. Picture a brilliant, arrogant 12-year-old boy suddenly placed in command of a military superpower surrounded by enemies. That's not a coming-of-age story. That's a disaster waiting to happen. So when news reached the Ottoman capital of Edirne that the Christians had broken the treaty, panic didn't spread. It exploded. The Crusader army was advancing through Bulgaria completely unchecked. The Ottoman viziers, experienced ministers who'd survived decades of war, looked at the boy sultan on the throne and knew the truth immediately. If Mehmed leads the army, the empire will collapse. So the Grand Vizier, Halil Pasha, did the only thing he could do. He sent riders to Manisa. One message, one desperate plea. Come back, we need you. But Murad refused. He said no. He said he was retired. He said he had sworn to step aside. He said the defense of the empire was now his son's responsibility. It was one of the most stubborn moments in Ottoman history. The empire was in danger, and the only man who could save it was basically saying, "Not my problem." Back in Edirne, 12-year-old Mehmed realized he was drowning. The enemy was coming. His generals were whispering. His ministers were panicking. So the boy did something that proved he had the spark of greatness in him. He wrote a letter to his father. A letter so legendary it might be the most passive-aggressive note ever sent in royal history. He said, "Father, if you are the Sultan, come lead your armies. If I am the Sultan, then I hereby order you to come lead mine." It was checkmate. Murad couldn't ignore a direct order from the Sultan, even if that Sultan was his own son. So with a heavy heart and a burning rage, Murad put down the wine cup and picked up his sword. But his anger wasn't just about being dragged back to work. It was about betrayal. Because Murad had trusted the Christian king's oath. He had believed the Bible oath meant something. And now he saw it for what it was: a lie. As Murad gathered forces in Anatolia, he did something that shocked even his own men. He didn't just rally his army with the promise of gold or glory. He rallied them with proof of Christian treachery. He took the actual treaty, the document with Ladislaus's signature, and carried it with him like a holy relic. Ottoman chroniclers claim he pinned it to a standard, intending to hold it up to the heavens on the battlefield. He wanted everyone, Allah, Jesus, the entire sky, to witness exactly who the liars were. But there was still one major problem. To reach the Crusaders, Murad needed to cross the Bosphorus Strait, Asia to Europe. And the Christians knew this. That was the whole strategy. The Papal fleet and the Venetian navy controlled the water, forming what seemed like an impenetrable blockade. Murad had an army of 60,000 men, but they were trapped on the wrong continent. On paper, the Crusaders were safe. King Ladislaus and his supreme commander, János Hunyadi, believed the war was already half won. Because how do you fight an enemy who physically cannot reach you? They assumed the Venetian wall on the sea was unbreakable. But history loves punishing people who rely too much on walls. Because while the Venetian admirals were busy counting their pay and arguing about patrol routes, another group of Italians smelled profit. The Genoese, rivals of Venice, masters of opportunism, and most importantly, greedy. They didn't care about crusades. They didn't care about the Pope. They cared about gold. So the Genoese approached Murad and made him an offer so shameless it makes modern arms dealers look ethical. For the price of 1 gold ducat per soldier, they would ferry the entire Ottoman army across the Bosphorus. 1 ducat per man. That's it. Imagine Crusader spies standing on the cliffs, expecting to see their allies sinking Ottoman ships. And instead, they watch Genoese vessels flying Christian flags working day and night, shuttling 60,000 Muslim soldiers into Europe like it's a marketplace delivery. Murad reportedly paid over 40,000 gold ducats for the service. The irony is suffocating. The crusade wasn't doomed by Ottoman tactics. It was doomed by Christian capitalism. Once Murad crossed, he didn't waste time. He force-marched his army toward Varna at breakneck speed. Meanwhile, the Crusaders were completely oblivious. They moved leisurely through Bulgaria, besieging small forts, accepting surrender, behaving like they were on a victory parade instead of a desperate invasion. At the head of this parade was János Hunyadi, and we need to give him respect. Hunyadi wasn't stupid. He was a legitimate military genius. The White Knight, the man who had spent his life studying the Ottomans. He built tactics specifically designed to counter them. But even a genius becomes useless if he's blind. Either his scouts failed, or he was too confident in the blockade. Because it wasn't until the Crusader army reached Varna, standing with the Black Sea crashing beside them, that reality hit like a hammer. Scouts came racing back, horses foaming, eyes wide with terror, and their message sounded impossible. The Sultan is here. Not stuck in Asia, not trapped behind ships. Here, a few miles away, blocking the road home, and he didn't bring a small force. He brought the entire imperial army. The trap had closed. The Crusaders were pinned between the Black Sea to the east, Lake Varna and marshland to the west, and 60,000 Ottomans looming to the north like a thunderstorm. Panic rippled through camp. The Crusaders had maybe 20,000 to 30,000 men, Polish knights, Hungarian nobles, mercenaries. Murad outnumbered them nearly 2-1. The terrain crushed many of Hunyadi's advantages. Suddenly, King Ladislaus, the boy who wanted glory, looked very small. His commanders urged defense. Use the wagons, hold, make them come to us. But the atmosphere was electric. They were cornered rats, and cornered rats have two choices: curl up and die, or bite with everything they have. As the sun rose on November 10th, 1444, the two armies prepared to collide. Cold wind blew in from the sea. Ottoman forces formed their crescent formation, designed to wrap around and crush. In the center stood the Janissaries, and behind them, atop a burial mound, Sultan Murad II planted the broken treaty into the earth like a flag. The stage was set, the talking was over, the dying was about to begin. The Battle of Varna didn't begin with a heroic cavalry charge. It began with a storm of arrows. That was the Ottoman opening move, classic, brutal, and effective. Use the numbers. Use the crescent formation. Wrap the smaller Christian army like giant arms closing around prey. On the wings were the Sipahis, elite Ottoman cavalry from Anatolia and Rumelia. They weren't heavy like European knights. They didn't fight like tanks. They fought like predators. Fast, lightly armored, masters of hit and run. Across from them stood the medieval dream of chivalry. Polish and Hungarian nobles in plate armor, mounted on massive war horses, shining like moving statues of steel. But statues don't move well in mud, and Varna was nothing but mud. As the Ottoman wings smashed into the Crusader flanks, the battlefield dissolved into chaos. Then came the first major disaster. On the Christian right, the Bishop of Varadin, an actual churchman commanding troops, saw what looked like an Ottoman retreat, and he made the fatal mistake every disciplined army fears. He broke formation. He ordered his men to chase. It was exactly what the Ottomans wanted. The retreat stopped. The crescent snapped shut, and within minutes, the bishop's forces were surrounded and butchered. This should have been the moment the Crusader army collapsed. The right flank was crumbling. Panic was spreading. But the Christians had one saving grace. One man who could turn disaster into survival, János Hunyadi. Hunyadi moved like he was made of iron and lightning. This is where the legend of his tactics becomes real. He understood the king was inexperienced, so he essentially told Ladislaus, "Stay here. Do not move. I will run this battle." He left the king in the center with his 500 elite bodyguards as a reserve. Then he rode straight into hell. What followed was a masterclass in heavy cavalry warfare. Hunyadi slammed into the Ottoman flank with such force he didn't just stop their advance, he shattered it. He rescued survivors from the bishop's blunder and drove the Ottoman Rumelian cavalry back toward the hills. And then, without resting, he saw the left flank collapsing too. So he wheeled his exhausted men across the entire battlefield and smashed into the Anatolian cavalry on the other side. It was superhuman. In just a few hours, Hunyadi had fought on both wings, routed both Ottoman cavalry forces, and saved the Crusaders from encirclement. The Ottoman army, 60,000 strong, was reeling. Their cavalry was fleeing. Their morale was cracking. From the center, where King Ladislaus watched, it looked like a miracle. The sea of turbans was parting. The enemy was running, and the road to the Sultan, standing behind his Janissaries on the burial mound, looked wide open. Murad saw it too. Ottoman chroniclers claim the Sultan was terrified in that moment. He actually turned his horse to flee. He thought the battle was lost. But a veteran Janissary grabbed the reins and forced him to stay. "You cannot leave us," the soldier reportedly shouted. So Murad remained, frozen on that mound, guarded by the Janissary corps, the final wall between the Crusaders and victory. When Hunyadi returned to the king, he was covered in blood and sweat, but triumphant, and his command was clear. "We've won the wings. Now we hold. The Sultan is protected by Janissaries behind stakes and trenches. We do not charge them. We wait. Let them break on us." It was the perfect plan, the winning play. But Hunyadi made one mistake. He underestimated the ego of a 20-year-old king. Because while Hunyadi was securing victory, a toxic conversation was happening around Ladislaus. The king's personal guard, young, hot-blooded Polish nobles, had spent the battle watching Hunyadi steal all the glory. They were jealous, and they whispered poison. When the bards sing of this day, they'll sing of Hunyadi, not you. If you don't strike now, the victory belongs to a subject. Charge the Sultan yourself. Become a legend. Be Alexander. It was the oldest trap in history. Vanity. Ladislaus looked toward the burial mound. He didn't see the stakes. He didn't see the ditch. He didn't see the Janissaries as a fortress. He saw a trophy. Ignoring Hunyadi's orders, the king drew his sword. He didn't rally the army. He didn't call for infantry support. He took only his 500 elite knights and charged straight down the center. It must have looked magnificent. Armor flashing, banners snapping in the wind, 500 heavy knights thundering like a spear aimed at the heart of the Ottoman Empire. But as they closed in, they realized why the Sultan hadn't fled. He was not exposed. He was protected by the Janissary corps, and the Janissaries did not panic. They did not break. They stood in silence, a wall of white caps and robes against the dark mud. Then the silence shattered. Arrows, early arquebus fire, the horses screamed, knights fell. They hit the defensive ditch, the one the king couldn't see, and the charge lost momentum instantly. The cavalry became trapped, piled together, helpless. Janissaries surged forward and dragged knights from saddles like hunters ripping prey from a trap. They hacked them apart with halberds and scimitars. Still, in the chaos, Ladislaus managed something insane. He broke through the first line. For a heartbeat, he was close enough to see Murad's face. He was that close to changing history. Then his horse was struck. The king fell into the mud, and before he could rise, a veteran Janissary named Koja Hussar ran forward. There was no duel, no honor, no chivalry, just one swing of a scimitar, and the king's head was gone. In an instant, hussar lifted the head onto a silver lance and raised it high. "Behold the head of your enemy!" The effect was immediate. The Crusader army shattered. The Polish knights screamed and fled. The Hungarian lines wavered. And when Hunyadi returned from the flank and saw what had happened, he reportedly stared in disbelief. Then he shouted one final tragic command. "The king is dead. Now we fight for our lives. Save yourselves." The Battle of Varna was over. A tactical masterpiece turned into catastrophe in less than 20 minutes, and the real horror had just begun. Because when an army breaks, it doesn't retreat like an army. It becomes a stampede. And Varna's geography offered no escape. Black Sea to the east, marshland to the west, Ottomans to the north. There was nowhere to run, only places to die. Thousands of soldiers sank into freezing wetlands. Their heavy armor became metal coffins. Knights drowned in inches of water, too weighed down to stand. Ottoman Sipahis returned with vengeance, cutting down stragglers like animals in a hunt. The night was filled with screams, prayers, and silence. Hunyadi gathered a handful of survivors and fought his way out, because if he died here, Hungary would be defenseless. He barely escaped to the Danube, leaving behind the destruction of his life's work. The next morning, the wagon fort, the Wagenburg, fell. Not a battle, an execution. When the sun rose on November 11th, the field was carpeted with bodies. 15,000 to 20,000 dead or dying. Even the Ottomans suffered so heavily, Murad didn't know for 3 days if he'd truly won. There's a haunting story from Ottoman chroniclers. Murad walked the battlefield stepping over friend and foe until he reached the spot where Ladislaus fell. The king's head was already gone, preserved in honey as a trophy, but his stripped body remained in the mud like any other dead boy. Someone congratulated the Sultan. Murad looked at the carnage and said, "May Allah never grant such a victory to my enemies." Not boasting, traumatized. Politically, though, the result was absolute. Europe's crusading spirit died at Varna, and the real winner watched from the sidelines. Mehmed II. The boy who'd been pushed aside watched his father crush the West and learned one lesson that would shape the next decade. The West wasn't invincible. They were divided, arrogant, and they could be beaten. 9 years later, that boy would march on Constantinople, and no one would come to save it, because the graves of Varna had already killed the dream of unity. History is often taught like destiny was inevitable, but Varna proves destiny is fragile. It can be shattered by one arrogant decision, one moment of pride, one broken promise. And the lesson still echoes today. Courage without wisdom is suicide. Integrity isn't just moral, it's geopolitical. Varna wasn't just a battle, it was a crossroads, and the world we live in is the path that followed. So tell me, was Cardinal Cesarini right? Do promises to enemies not count? Or was Varna a divine punishment for treachery? And if you were Ladislaus, would you have charged or held the line? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the fall of Constantinople prequel, destroy that like button the way the Janissaries destroyed those knights, and subscribe for more history that hits harder than a cannonball. Until next time, keep looking for the truth in the shadows of the past.